So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me on the You're Not Alone podcast today. I'm super excited to have you on in preparation for this episode. Obviously, Liz, good friend of both of us, introduced us. And I was really, really excited when I started kind of digging into your story and your background. I want to dive deeper into that. But for my audience tuning in, can you just give them kind of that quick 30-second introduction on you? And then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I started struggling with some mental health conditions, which later would be properly diagnosed as obsessive compulsive disorder and body dysmorphic disorder, I'd say were my main diagnosis. I also got a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, which isn't surprising when you have two major disorders, had a lot of panic attacks and anxiety that went with that, was able after bad treatment, able to find proper treatment, and then kind of went back to living life and decided to go full circle and become an advocate first and give back to OCD and mental health that way, and then became a therapist. And now that's what I do. So that's kind of like my full circle journey in 30 seconds.
I mean, and just even hearing that is super inspiring. And I just think there are so many people, I see that as a trend where like so many people that have struggled with some sort of diagnosis are in one way or another contributing back into the space, because there is no, well, I guess I can't say that, but there's something about that level of it's deep suffering. OCD, depression. I really want to dive into BDD or body dysmorphic disorder, because I think that candidly that's something I want to learn more about. But there's just something about that type of struggle that just makes people want to give back. They want to be involved. It's a different level of pain, I feel like, from my own personal experience, and then just the stories that I've heard over the years. And so I want to talk about your story, but I want to talk about it through the lens of body dysmorphic disorder, because this is something that I've heard a lot about, but I don't know a lot about it. And I want to kind of hear about that journey. I read a little bit about it because I know you have a blog out, but I was like, I don't even want to read the whole thing. I want to hear it for the first time. So can you kind of walk me through the progression of how that sort of started to take place?
Yeah. And like I said, I'll just keep going, but jump in and cut me off. And if you have any questions, let me know. The first thing I'll say about body dysmorphic disorder, just for clarity, I think a lot of times people hear the word body dysmorphia, and with that sort of taken a kind of a world of its own. And, it's valid that people are experiencing it. It isn't a clinical diagnosis, right now. But that would be where somebody maybe gained some weight over the pandemic and really don't like how they look in a bathing suit and feel very self-confident. That's not what body dysmorphic disorder is. BDD is a completely different beast. And the best way I can explain it to people is when you know somebody with anorexia, you look at them and they're like skin and bones, and they look like they're like very close to being, passing out, being unhealthy, malnourished, and potentially dead. And when you talk to that individual, they will look you straight in the face and say, I am overweight. And you just are so confused. How can they see something so different? What body dysmorphic disorder is it's very similar to that. Typically the neck up, but it can be anywhere on the body. And it's where we with BDD literally look in the mirror and we see ourselves differently. And in fact, UCLA, a major institute in Australia, they've put something out when they've done kind of like eye scans with it. They've seen that the way that somebody who doesn't have BDD, the way that somebody does looks at a face or their own face, it's different. We look at things as individual pieces of a puzzle, whereas you see like a whole face. And because of that, with BDD, you get very fixated on specific body parts, usually facial features, and you see it differently than the average person. So for me, I mean, the way that BDD hit as a young kid. So my fixation when I was younger, kind of my first fixation was my hair. I was really, really obsessed with having to keep my hair like properly combed, neat. And I had this belief in my head that my hair was like wild and untamed. And I felt very self-conscious about it. And this was when I was in like second grade. So I was like 7 years old. And so in order to kind of feel okay to go to school, I used to hide combs, like a comb and a brush. I'd put them in a, like a lunch bag, like a brown bag. and I'd bring them in my backpack, and I'd play recess, have a good time. And there would be a first bell where you'd have like 5 minutes left. And I would sprint to my backpack, go into a bathroom that nobody was in, and then sit there and comb my hair to fix it being out of place, from playing. And I mean, I'm 7 years old, 6 years old, and so self-conscious about it.
Quick question for you. Was there, because you talked about like you had this belief system that your hair was like tame and wild. And I know from like an OCD standpoint, like I was having these intrusive thoughts that like I was like, okay, wait, like I feel like I know that this is somewhat an irrational thought, like, but you just it's like it's hard to beat OCD until you know what the tactics are. Did you receive messaging as a kid, like getting teased by like a friend or an aunt or an uncle, like, oh, your hair is like a rat's nest, like your hair is like, wow, like crazy hair Chris or something like that? Like, did you receive, like, is that kind of why it started with the hair?
No, and that's what's so different. I mean, BDD and OCD have similarities, but that's what BDD is so different. I mean, you can see my hair right now. I've always had straight hair. I've always had hair that's like, kind of just falls flat on my head. I've never had like curly hair or wavy hair or anything like that. My hair has always just been kind of boring, like it's furthest from the truth. And that's what makes having both. I mean, that's really what's different about BDD is it was never something that like made sense. It wasn't like, okay, 42 kids made fun of this, therefore now I have this belief system. It comes from just a like when I look in a mirror as a kid at the time, I saw my hair is like sticking up all over the place. And I know when I'd have to get, take pictures, when my mom would take us to the mall and we'd have to take pictures, I was like, my hair, and I kept pulling it down, and the photographer would be like, it's fine. Like it's laid down. It can't be any more laid down. But I literally believed and saw something different. And so, for most of us with BDD, or I look at like my BDD journey, it's like, I think maybe one or two comments my whole entire lifespan were on a body part that I got focused on. But a lot of the body parts, it was never something that somebody made a comment about. And sometimes there's things people even made positive comments about. They'd be like, oh, I really like your this. And I would hate it. So at that time, it wasn't like, oh, I think this is a worry that I have that makes no sense, or, oh, kids are making fun of me. It was just strictly, that was such an intense focus of mine, to the point that hated pictures. I hated, anything that could mess up my hair.
One other thing before we dive back into your story too, that I found really fascinating just off the jump, is that there's studies coming out that basically say that people with BDD see, like, it's almost like the optics are literally like something is altered in the way that you see it, and you see it almost in pieces. What is that? I guess help me picture, like, looking through your lens, like when you're like, how do you see it in pieces?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest way that I could explain it the best, because my focus went from my hair to my under eyes to my skin. My skin, I would say that was when it was the worst. And so when I look back at pictures in high school, it's insane to me, because I look at this picture and I had maybe one or two pimples, pretty much clear skin. And I thought I had like cystic acne, holes on my face, like pit marks and all of that. So when I would go into a mirror, I wouldn't like make eye contact and look at myself. I'd go in the mirror, I'd get extremely close. I would zone in on the parts that I didn't like. And it was like, all you would see is this. And so if somebody's ever looked under a magnifying mirror and they've looked at like a one tooth on a magnifying mirror, it kind of looks strange. You're like, oh, I've never even noticed that.
That's why I don't do it, Chris, because I've done that before, and I'm like, oh, I'm kind of ugly,
right?
Like, when I get in too close, I'm like, wait, I need to zoom it out. I need to get
it. But that's how, it's not even that we need the magnifying mirror. Our eyes do that for us. Like, we really kind of zone into one body part, and it's not going in there neutral. It's going in there with these like very judgmental lens, and going in there and being, basically going in with the idea of disgust. And that's the thing about BDD too. It was never like, hey, my hair looks kind of funny. It was a disgust. It was feeling like an other or different. So what switched for me when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, so I was probably like 11, 12, 13, it then became my under eyes. My aunts never said anything about me, but I remember my aunt once saying like, oh, I got the Calamir's under eyes, because my mom's maiden name. And then so I'm freaking out as, like a 11-year-old, like, oh my God, I have horrible under eyes, I'm going to get it and stuff.
Right.
So it got bad to where when I would get ready in the morning, I would keep the bathroom light off, and I would keep like a hallway light on so that it was like dim lighting. So I'd get ready in almost the dark, because when I'd get ready in the normal lighting, I would go right up to the mirror. So inevitably the light was shining down, and I would see these bags under my eyes. And I was like, when I'd go to school, I'd kind of rest my hands like this to cover them. And I was so self-conscious about them. And I would see commercials where people would put like an eye cream under their eye. And so my mom, had eye cream, and I started putting on eye cream at 11. Like, who does that? But I was so desperate because I thought I looked tired. I thought I looked, and that was another fixation of me, is needing to get so much sleep, because I was like, I can't get my eye bags to be worse. I can't get them to be worse. And when I look at a picture of me at 11, obviously I didn't have eye bags, but in my head, I mean, if I could have taken what my head saw and put it on the picture, you would have been convinced. But I swore.
And it's like, when you're looking at yourself, like, you're actually seeing it.
Yeah.
It's like it's not like one of those things where you look in the mirror and you're like, okay, they're not there. And it becomes like this compulsion thing where you're checking constantly. Like, when you look, that's what you see.
To the point that I almost don't want to check, because it's like I already see it, and that's the other thing about BDD, is it doesn't feel like something outside of you. It feels like you as a core. So when I would see that, I would see it and I'd be disgusted, disappointed. I would be sad. I'd feel defeated, because it all comes back to, in society, we want to look decent. We want to be accepted. I mean, when I was really going through this, because then it transferred to my skin in high school, that's like the stage in your life that you just want to be accepted. You want to find your place in the world. Your high school is almost like its own little planet, its own country.
Yes.
You want to be accepted by people. You want to fit in. And so
true.
for me, it was devastating. I mean, I just felt like an outsider. And so what also sucks with BDD is, like, I get into high school playing sports,
What'd you
get
play?
on prom. I played soccer, football, and volleyball.
Oh my goodness. Nice little spread. Okay. I like that.
I played most competitive. I played volleyball. I played like club volleyball. I played volleyball on the team, but I played football, soccer, and tennis. I didn't do tennis in high school. I did tennis outside of school, and then played a little bit in college. So
nice. Okay. So you have an athlete's background then too.
Yeah. So I'm in high school, like athlete's background. I lost some of my baby fat through puberty and stuff. So I started getting attention from girls at school, and like feeling attractive. It was the worst thing for BDD, which doesn't sound like it makes sense.
Okay.
But now my brain is telling me, like, oh, people are lying. Like, they're saying you look good just to make you feel better, because you're so unattractive that people almost feel pity. And also what would happen is, like, somebody would give me a compliment, and then it would make the BDD more intense, because it's like, oh, people are noticing you. People, think you look good. But, with BDD, what's also crazy is, like, you can see one mirror and lighting, and then an hour later seeing a different mirror and lighting, sometimes the same mirror and lighting, and see something completely different.
Yeah.
So I would wake up, and it started to become my skin. And I would wake up and think my skin was bad that day, and I was having a bad skin day. So I just wouldn't go to school, because in my head, it's like, I'm going to show up and people are going to say, yesterday, Chris, you looked, you were attractive. Today you come to school and you have horrible skin. What happened? Like, that's just how BDD works too.
Yeah.
Is this idea that your appearance can like morph and look different. Because I would go to school some days on a high, catch a glimpse in a mirror at school, and be devastated and leave school. I mean, that's how quick it could change.
And like, when you would catch that glimpse, like, and you would want to leave school, what is the feeling that just rushed over you? Was it like sick to my stomach? Like, did you feel anxiety? Like, what came over you?
It was different than anxiety, because anxiety with OCD, felt that. For me, it was more of a disgust. It was like an embarrassment. It was like a shame. Like, how am I even going to school? I remember one of our tournaments for volleyball, we all stayed, not everybody, but like our friends on the team, we all stayed together at somebody's house. And I remember like waking up, and like I would create this like intense morning skincare routine. And we didn't have like TikTok people back then teaching you your skin routine. Like it was me literally just going to the grocery store, going to the acne aisle, and just like reading the back of the ingredients. And I remember waking up so early and like sneaking in the bathroom and doing my whole skin routine. And then when my friends got up and just were like, there were a bunch of teenage guys, they literally like brushed their teeth and we left. And I remember thinking like, I can't do that. I'm less than, I'm embarrassed, I'm disgusted. Like I felt gross. I remember one of my friends' dads each summer would take us to whitewater rafting. And I remember, thinking I was having bad skin on that trip, and just, like waking up and trying to put skin product on and fix it. And, just all this, just focus all the time on it, and just feeling absolutely unattractive. And I remember there was a guy at school, I remember his name was Ian, and he did track. I don't even know what he's doing these days, but he like genuinely had like pretty bad cystic acne. And I remember, even though like people reacted to it, people weren't mean and stuff like that, but people would like ask him if it hurts, and he was talking about Accutane and stuff. Nobody would say that to me, but I thought mine was worse than his, to the point that people were so embarrassed to bring it up to me. I remember, for yearbook pictures and for like dance photos, you could like check mark the thing to have them like edit out your acne. And I remember check marking it and the guy saying, you don't need it. But that was the disconnect. It's like, I really saw it. I saw my skin as that in high school, and it just caused so much exhaustion, to the point my senior year, I rarely showed up to school.
Because it was just every single day. It was like, gosh, if I look, like, who's going to show up in the mirror today, and what am I going to see? And I'm so sick and tired of this acne and feeling shame and disgusted. And it's funny that you bring this up, because about the guy that did have cystic acne. So I have scarring from acne from sophomore year. Got absolutely plagued with horrible acne sophomore year of high school. I felt guilt. I was ashamed of it. I like wanted to hide it so badly. And I was just with a friend last night, one of my best friends, and we were laughing because I played basketball in high school, and the coach's son came up to me. He was like 8 or 9 years old, in the middle of practice, and was like, pass me the ball, pepperoni face. And I was like, oh, like just an absolute missile to the heart. And for me, it was truly my reality. Like I was on Accutane. I was doing like, I think Proactive, that was a thing, right? Is Proactive still a thing now? I'm not sure, but
I don't know. I haven't seen the commercials. They used to snag every celebrity, and we just swore that Justin Bieber had the best skin because of Proactive. Right, all fake.
It was all fake, right? Right? Yeah. So I can relate to, I guess, so I can relate to the other guy, and then I can imagine how you must have felt, because I had that sinking feeling in my stomach, the guilt, the shame, the disgust. Like there were days when I didn't want to go to school. But obviously very different, right, from actually having BDD. But it's interesting that you say that, because I did go through that phase, and it was rough, because I was trying to find myself. Just like you said, it's like high school is like its own little, you're in your own little civilization. It's that is your world. I mean, it feels that bit like it's everything. And here you are struggling silently with this massive hurdle, this massive challenge. And at this time, right, in your life, didn't have the tools truly to know how to overcome that.
Yeah. And what was difficult, I mean, speaking of Accutane, so I started going to dermatologists. I was like, I need to go to a dermatologist and stuff. And so my mom would take me. I was like really desperate. And I would go and I would talk about like needing to get on Accutane, because obviously like I read about it, I heard of it. And every dermatologist I would see was like, I'm not going to put you on Accutane. Like you have to have like really severe acne. There's side effects, there's all that. And I was desperate. And so none of them would do it. I ended up finding one dermatologist. She would do like the skin treatment. She's like, I'll do the skin treatment. It's going to, make your skin glow. You're a teenager with a lot of oil and, and stuff like that. But, that didn't satisfy me. So I ended up going on Accutane. And the only way that I went on it is I found this like ancient dermatologist. I think I like bullied him into it. I was just like, dude, like I need to go on it. But then
Yeah.
he retired and I had to find a new dermatologist. And as soon as the dermatologist found out I was on Accutane, she took me off of it because she's like, you don't
Yeah.
have acne. You don't need it. And I think that that's what made me crazy, is because I would look in the mirror and see it and everybody's telling me I don't have it. And it just, like I said, you feel insane. You feel like it's like Truman Show, where everybody's in on the secret and won't tell you and won't just admit
Oh,
it.
that's a
So
great example. That's a
yeah,
great analogy. I mean,
yeah, it brought on this like level of depression, because I was just, why doesn't anybody just tell me that I have bad skin? And I would constantly just be sitting in the mirror, just staring at it. I would always get acne product that had like tint in it to try to like cover my skin, even like if it felt really bad, like getting, stealing my sister's makeup, like I was doing anything to cover it up. I remember
yeah.
wishing there was like a dome over the school and only had soft lighting, or we could only go to class at night. So it was really bad. And then when I graduated high school, the acne stuff was still there, but then I started focusing on my nose was next. And I remember just always kind of looking at it from the side and taking pictures. Then it became the size of my forehead. I felt like my forehead was big and was, wondering if there was surgery to lower it. It was my chin not strong. I mean, it just kept attacking different parts of basically my face. And it was just to the point where I remember thinking like somebody didn't put me together correctly. Like my body parts, my facial stuff doesn't really like fit how it should. And once again, it was never about like, I want to be attractive. That was never my thinking. Like I want to be good looking. It was, I want to be normal, because I felt so less than. So, I mean, I liken it to like, if you've ever seen somebody that, had acid thrown on their face, or who was like born with like a facial disfigurement, like that's more what people with BDD see themselves as. It's not them seeing themselves as like, when they, in a TV show, when they hire an actor who's supposed to be like the ugly guy that hits on the girl. That's not how we see ourselves. I mean, we really see ourselves as something's wrong. Something is visually unappealing to the point that we don't even deserve to be in society. So that was much of my years after high school, was like isolation, quitting college, quitting high school, dropping from friends. I mean, the saddest thing looking back in my story is like all my friends that I had from high school and like friends I'd made after high school, I dropped. I didn't want to see them because I felt like my appearance was so rapidly diminishing that if I bumped into them, they'd look at me and be like, what happened? You look even worse than you did. So there was just a lot of isolation at that point.
Have you reconnected with any of those friends, or?
I ended up reconnecting with only one after treatment, because what happened was I isolated myself, and then I was living on my own with a roommate, and we were kind of, it was kind of like a duplex situation. Like we did live together, but because of the OCD, which of course, BDD was already hard enough, there was a lot of, we were clashing, we weren't getting along. So it wasn't like this, like we're besties kind of situation. Like it was like very much, ships in the night. She had her own entrance. We didn't really talk to each other, but it just kept rapidly diminishing. And that's where the depression came in, because I'm an extrovert. And now here I am every single day, like not seeing friends, not seeing family, not going to school, not going to work, and just spending all my time alone, just basically like leaving the house to buy the necessities, but pretty much just isolation from everyone. So at that point, I dropped off from everyone. I didn't talk to anybody from like high school, from college, from anybody, no friendships, no real family and stuff. So that lasted almost like 3 years. And that was probably
of
like
just the decline in your friend group, and and it was just this continued sort of like bubble of isolation that just continued to just close in on you, sort of.
Yeah, I still kept it to this day, so I still have it. But what I did, I remember one time I had like a journal and I wrote out like what I needed to fix to feel attractive enough to like reconvene in society. There were some superficial things like getting a haircut or something. Those weren't really big, but it was like clear skin, getting a nose job, getting like jaw surgery so my jaw was more pronounced. It was I think like getting a hairstyle. I don't think I ever was like, I need to like because I didn't think you could move your hairline down, but I think it was like getting a hairstyle that covers up your forehead. Like it was these very, dramatic things that are expensive, and I wasn't in the mental state to get. Thank God I was poor and young, or else I would have gotten that stuff. And I remember just every day it feeling like I was never going to achieve that. I stopped like really caring how I looked, because it was like, what's the point of getting a new outfit? It's like putting a shirt on a pig. It's like, until I can fix these things about my appearance, there's no point.
This is such, I really appreciate you sharing. I'm learning so much through this. You know what just came to my head, and I wonder if you know about, have you seen the pictures of like the real life Ken doll guy?
Yes.
And the real life like there's a few like on the Barbie side too. Do you, I mean, I don't know where they're at in their journeys right now, but do you have a feeling that BDD might be?
For sure.
Because
for sure, that would be me. I mean, when I look at them now, I know what people say. They look at them and say, how can this person think this is attractive? Like, how can this person have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars deliberately going and trying to look like this? It makes no sense, but I get it. Because honestly, I guarantee that when they looked in the mirror prior to these surgeries, they saw what I saw, because I was that guy. I mean, I really, if I had the money to do it, I would have gotten surgeries. I would have gotten things done for sure.
Is the gotcha though, that even after the surgery, it still wouldn't have satisfied you, right?
Because this is a mental disorder. It's not a physical appearance thing. And so that's why they keep getting more surgeries. And that's why it was like never enough for me either. Even though I never went out and got plastic surgeries, I did do some dermatological things like facials and peels and stuff. But it's not about that, and it will never end. I mean, I look at the people, hey, maybe even Michael Jackson, that just keep getting surgery after surgery, and it doesn't fulfill it, because either the surgery feels like it was done wrong and you have to correct it, or the surgery like worked and now you're like, okay, what's next? What else is wrong? And so when I see these pictures of people that have gotten 42 plastic surgeries, and we all look at it and you're just like, why are they doing that to themselves? It's like, because I guarantee if we could see what they saw in the mirror, they would see something completely different than what we do. Because that was me. I mean, when I was in my decline looking in the mirror, I don't have many pictures from that time. Like, I avoided pictures like the plague. I always remember my sister would get new pictures each year, and my mom would put it up at her work, and I just stopped taking pictures around 15. There's a few that I took like at dances or something, but it's not like, now every kid has 80,000 pictures of themselves. But my mom didn't have any professional new picture to put up, and like coworkers of her thought I had like died or something, because they're like, oh, the girl keeps changing, the boy is still so young. But I mean, I do have some pictures, and when I look back at those times, I'm like, dude, I look normal. Like, how did I see myself the way I saw myself? But when you're isolated, depressed, not interacting with people, and shut in with a mental disorder, it just makes it worse.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%, because it's you versus your brain at that point. And your brain has been sending you this messaging for years at this point, and now you don't have any outside like perspective at all, which I know for me, when I was isolating with OCD, I mean, it spiraled so quick.
Oh, for sure. And that's what happened to me. I mean, the both saddest part of like my past life experiences, and the best, because it turned out, is like, for me, it had gotten so bad. I mean, I was pretty much living off of savings, because I'd worked since I was 15, didn't have a relationship with my family, my roommate, no friends. And I was getting really worried because I had no finances, but I was in no state of mind to go to work. I still had to fix all these things about my parents and stuff. So to me, the isolation got to me. I mean, I just got to a point where I was waking up and could barely function. And so for me, when I was like around 22, I attempted suicide. That was like the lowest part of my life. So I'd seen the movie The Client, which is a John Grisham novel. And in like the very beginning of the film, the guy like stuffs up his exhaust pipe with like a rag, and then runs the car, and because the carbon monoxide dies. So we had my roommate and I had a garage that both of us didn't use. We used it for storage. And I remember moving stuff out and like taking my car in there. And for me, I just wanted it done. I was just like depleted. I didn't feel, because it wasn't just the BDD, because that was a big part of it, but it was the isolation, which then proved the BDD right. Because
Yeah.
now the BDD is like, well, of course nobody's around you. Like you look disfigurement. Like you should have fixed your appearance. Like I said, you should have figured out how to get money. You should have gotten more surgeries. You should have tried different products. And so for me, it was just like, the lowest that I was at. So, pulled my car into the garage, ran the car. I remember like after about 5 minutes, like getting out, going into my house and being like, am I about to really do this? And I had like those full length mirrors. I remember standing in front of the full length mirror and just seeing my appearance and just being like, yeah, like I can't do this anymore. Like there's just no hope. I felt like things were too far gone because, like I said, I didn't know what BDD was. I didn't know what I was
Right.
going through. To me, it was
Right.
just that I was an unattractive person, and all these people I was going to for help were acting like I was making it up or weren't helping me, and I didn't know why. And so I went back in, ran my car. My roommate came home. She like never came home from work, but she came home from work, and obviously here's a car in the garage that we never use, and like opened the door and caught me, kind of, in my car, and I was like in and out of consciousness. And I just remember her kind of freaking out, me kind of lying to her, trying to be like, oh, I was in my car, I fell asleep, stuff like that. We didn't really have a relationship at that point.
Yeah.
And her being like really concerned, you need like help or anything like that. So I ended up going to the hospital, bullshitted my way, or I don't know if I can cuss, BS
Yeah.
my
Oh,
way
yeah.
through.
Yeah. This is you be yourself on this
Yeah,
show.
yeah. So okay, so bullshitted to the doctor and was just like, I was in my car, like fell asleep, it's nothing, etc. And I just remember there was no, at the time, like no pleasure that I was still alive. There was no part of me that was like, what did I just do? I was relieved. To me, it was more so like, shit, I have to wake up tomorrow and go through this again and again and again and again. So I ended up moving in with my dad, my grandma, and my youngest sister because when I was at the hospital, the doctor didn't really buy it and was kind of just like, look, like you need to be around people. Like you need to, you really need to see someone. You're not a harm to yourself. You're telling me you're not, we're going to release you, but you need to be with your family. So talked to my dad, moved in with him, and just was at such a low and didn't know what to do. So at the time was a lot closer with my mom. Kind of reached out with her and just opened up to what happened. Just that, look, like my whole life is a spiral. And my mom's talked about it. And she always asked herself, like, how did I know? Because to her, it's like, oh, my young son is like living in a different city. He has a roommate. He has a job. He's taking care of himself. He doesn't need to come home and see me because he's doing so great. And in actuality, like everything had fallen apart. And so for her, it was like a big wake up call, like, oh my God, my son just attempted his life. He's in a horrible place. We got to find him help. So we all thought it was depression. I mean, that's what we just thought, because I was not opening up to my family about my appearance because I was so horrified by it and was embarrassed to even bring it up to people. I mean, during high school, my mom now can look back and say there was definitely things that she wishes she would have caught. Like I was always in the mirror in our hallway, to the point where my sister couldn't get out of her room because I'd have the hallway door open because it was like my perfect mirror and perfect lighting.
Yeah.
So, I'd always have the blinds closed with like warm lighting. There's certain things that she can now look back and see, but nobody knew what BDD was. So we went just therapist to therapist, and because the depression was so brought on by the BDD and OCD as well, none of the depression therapy really worked. Finally found someone who, actually, I take that back. I found an article about OCD, and there were certain OCD things that I had. But what's interesting is I won't get into like my traditional OCD because we're talking about BDD, but some of my OCD was very centered around BDD. So an example would be I wanted all my surfaces clean, not because I thought I was going to get a disease or germs, but because I read that, hey, if you have acne, don't touch your face because dirt and oils will get on your skin and have you break out. So in my head, it's like, if I have everything around me clean, if I touch my skin by accident, my fingers will be clean and I won't get acne. So some of my OCD stuff was all about my appearance.
Okay. Okay.
Like kind of tied in.
Know.
So luckily I found an article that talked about OCD, eventually got an OCD diagnosis, but got a terrible therapist who was basically like, you're the worst case I've ever seen, never going to get better. You're going to have to live at home. We can work together. It'll probably take about 4 years for you to see some relief, but this is kind of like a lifelong thing. So luckily, my mom's kind of a badass, didn't quit there and found the International OCD Foundation, found a treatment provider up in Los Angeles at the OCD Center of LA.
Mm.
And so went in, had total OCD diagnosis and was doing OCD treatment. The OCD started getting better, but the BDD wasn't getting better. And in fact, it was harder because I had isolated for so long. And now I'm up in Westwood going to therapy. The therapy office was like on top of a LA Fitness gym. So I'm like walking through a gym where everybody's perfect looking, and I'm going on an elevator and around people. And so when I started opening up to her a little bit about how, because once again, I wasn't telling her about my appearance concerns because there was no part of me that thought it was a concern. I didn't think of it as like, this is a problem, mental health. My brain more so thought of it as, I look disfigured, I look hideous. Of course I feel this way. Who wouldn't? So it was never like, let me bring it up to my therapist, because it wasn't something to bring up. Like you said, with OCD, you could tell it's like, disconnected. So I didn't, I knew something was wrong there, but not with the appearance stuff.
Right. It felt matter of fact. You're like, well,
For
duh.
sure.
Like, of course, like, look at me. Like, who wouldn't feel this way?
If I lost a limb, sure, maybe I would think of going to a therapist of how to overcome like the distress of losing a limb, but I wouldn't go to the therapist and bring up that I had lost a limb. Like, she didn't notice it, like there was no reason to bring it up. But when I started opening up about why I was doing some of the OCD to my appearance, my therapist, shout out to Karen Pickett, she opened up to me a little bit about how she had experienced BDD because of a scar on her face. And she said, I really think you might have this disorder called body dysmorphic disorder. And it just so happened that a therapist in Los Angeles, who still practices to this day, his name's Ari Winograd, he was starting the first like body dysmorphic disorder support group ever. And she said, look, I think you might have this. Here's a flyer. Why don't you go and get an assessment to see if you have this thing? And so I remember doing an assessment with him and just breaking down in tears, because it was the first time that somebody spoke my language. Like, everything he asked me about, I was like, holy crap.
Like, you're in my head. I feel like you're finishing my sentences.
For sure. I'm like, bro, you're in my bushes, like taking notes. This is awkward. Like, you have to be like
quit stalking me.
Right? Exactly. I'm like, you got to be living in my basement, because for you to know these things, like something here has to catch. And so he started a support group. And I remember walking in to the first group. I was so nervous. I was like, what if I don't really have this disorder? What if I have some false hope? I'm going to walk in and everyone's going to look at me and be like, ugh, So I walk in and I remember sitting down, and in the support group, everybody looks normal. Some were attractive, some, but everybody was like good looking or normal looking, or nothing was wrong. And I just remember feeling bamboozled, like, holy shit. Okay, my mom's cheap, so I know she didn't pay actors to come in to make me feel better, but something's up. Like, something is completely up, because there is no way everybody could look normal. And here I come in looking hideous, The Mask, or, it's an old school movie. Something's wrong with me. So I felt very just like hoodwinked. I was just like, something's wrong here. But as people opened up and shared their story, I was so confused, because I remember there was a young girl who had already gotten like chin implants and stuff at like 19. There was another girl talking about her nose. There was a girl talking. I'm looking and I'm like, either I didn't see anything, or it might be like the slightest. I'd have to get a magnifying glass to see it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy crap. Like, these people are so normal looking, but the way they talk is how I talk.
Yeah.
And Ari Winograd has BDD himself. And so he talked about his stuff. And I'm like, okay, everybody, we're all speaking a different, like the same language that I've never heard people speak like this. And so, not right away, but over time, I started thinking, if these people think they look how I think I look, but I think they look normal, some of them attractive, what if that's me? Like, what if I'm like that too? So through the group, we did it was more of like a treatment and support group. So I definitely did treatment, and then started seeing Ari in an individual. And so the treatment was different than OCD treatment. I mean, a lot of it was just recognizing that I'd created these kind of false schemas or beliefs about myself. Like, I was hideous, I was unlovable, something's wrong with me, but I had no evidence of that. I didn't have people throughout my life. I remember him asking me, like, do you remember somebody growing up that had something that was kind of embarrassing looking and people made fun of it? And I remember I was never one of these people, so I have good karma. But I remember there was a kid in my class that had like that cleft lip, I think it's called, and kids making fun of him. All those kids are in hell right now. No, I'm just kidding. Never did it. Never made fun of somebody else. I was so focused on my hideousness, I couldn't make fun of another. But
can I ask you something about that? As a part of the signs and symptoms for people listening, did you spend a lot of time in your head comparing yourself to all of your peers? Like,
all the time.
You would notice the acne on somebody else's face and be like, oh, that person has acne. But obviously your brain would then twist it back on you somehow, right? But you were always noticing everybody's skin and their hair.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
But what was different about it with the skin is it was like, I would almost ignore anybody. Like, I remember the kid Ian, but I would almost in general ignore bad skin and only fixate on people that had good skin. And I remember thinking like everybody in my high school was so attractive, like all the girls, all the guys, because they had great skin and everything. And like, no shade to them, but if I look back at my yearbook now, I'm like, okay, some of these people weren't attractive. Like, I'm not judging or I'm not putting them down, but I put them on such a pedestal because I felt so low. So I remember like looking in teen magazines, and this is the part you need to edit out because I would take my sister's magazine and look through it. So please put a disclaimer that no judgment that this guy was looking. No, but my sister would get like the 17 magazine. I'd look through, and I remember there'd be celebrities that they'd always have the airbrush skin and stuff, and so I'd put them on such a pedestal. So the comparison was a joke because I never walked out of that comparison winning. It was always everybody has great skin. My hairline became a fixation for a while. So it's like everybody has full head of hair, everybody has clear skin, perfect nose, like good cheekbones, good chin, and I don't. And so one of the exercises I actually did in therapy, I remember he's like, because I had to start leaving my house because I was still housebound pretty much. And I remember one of the exercises we did together is we walked around Westwood, and he's like, I want you to just kind of keep a tracker. I want you to keep a tracker of like how many people have like perfect skin, perfect hair, and look like models. Cause I would always tell him like, I hate coming up here because everybody looks like a model. And he's like, and then I want you to count how many people just look average. And because I had so often discounted everybody else and only fixated on anybody up in LA that looked attractive, it might be 4 people. So I did that. And, I'd walk through the gym, there'd be a couple people, but I would, we'd come back from the session and debrief. And it's like, okay, maybe I found like 7 people that I thought were like really good looking, had everything perfect, and maybe 86 that were like not bad looking people, of course, but they didn't have perfect everything. And he's like, do you recognize how your brain will only fixate on the 7, discount the other ones because your brain is looking for something so you can feel less than? That's how the disorder works. You've got to be in that sort of deep, icky, I hate myself, susceptible place for the BDD to thrive. And so, comparison was such a part of my treatment. And it was part of the getting better is like, stop comparing myself. Because remember, comparison is like a second step. I can observe someone and then I have to do more to start to compare. And so the treatment was more so when we walked around observing people. And if somebody had a nice skin, props for them, but I don't need to take it to that second step and then be inferior. It's like if I light somebody else's candle from mine, it doesn't mean my flame has to go out. So, I always remember him saying, like, when you go to a restaurant, if you order chicken, it's not like the steak is in the back crying because you didn't pick it. It's like you can like steak and chicken. So just because I see somebody that has good teeth doesn't mean suddenly I have to have bad teeth. Everything is in a first or last place. And so a big part of my treatment was starting to reconnect with people, go to stores, make eye contact, interact with people, reduce the mirror checking, starting to take pictures. I remember one of the gifts I gave everybody on my 24th birthday was I went and got pictures and like surprised everybody with pictures. And I'm like, Mom, you can tell people I do exist at work. But, it was a picture. It's funny. I was at my grandma's house for Father's Day because we all met there. And the picture, she still has that picture up, but it was such a big deal for me because I hadn't taken a picture in like 5 or 6 years at that point. So, my treatment was pretty much like re-engaging, challenging the thoughts. It's different than OCD. It's because I believe those thoughts, it's starting to look at how did I even come up with this thought in the first place? There was never any evidence. I wasn't bullied for my skin. It was all in my head. getting back out there, starting to date, to make friends, to make eye contact, to walk into the grocery store during the day versus 2 a.m. And nobody, I assume people would point, stare, laugh, and throw things. People, especially in LA, couldn't care less. They were doing their own thing.
I was going to say, I was just there. LA's a vibe, man. I mean, it's people, they get desensitized up there with the amount of things I was just up there for 24 hours and it's a different vibe.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Somebody could be literally like
defecating on the sidewalk,
underwear and like a cape and like, screaming, and people would walk around the guy and just keep going, like,
and just keep moving.
Nobody could care less. People could not care less the fact that I was walking around Westwood, and it helped because it was just like, okay, like I have enough logic now going through the treatment for a while. I got on medication, which really helped with clarity as well. And it was like, okay, I'm not naive. Like nobody's reacting in the way that, children aren't staring, people aren't pointing, people aren't putting me down. So this really has to be in my head. So I got to like a really, really good place. And then that's when I went back to work. I was working in film production before, ended up getting an on-camera gig. And what was so difficult about that is, I'd have to watch myself back. They would like play the recording. I'd have to do like a voiceover, things like that, taking a lot of pictures, being out at these Hollywood events. And so it was really difficult for me, and actually went back to treatment because the treatment was so much about not looking at myself and engaging in life. And now I have a job where I have to look at myself a lot. So really went in, kind of did like a second round of treatment. But because I'd already kind of done it, it wasn't as long, and really just got to a good place about it. And in fact, working in Hollywood helped because I would see these celebrities up close. We'd be interviewing them for an event or something. A lot of them were shorter than I thought. They didn't have perfect skin, perfect teeth.
Tom Cruise, brother. I had to break my wife's heart the other day. We saw the new Top Gun, and she looked over at me, and Miles Teller, the entire movie, I had to hear about those two. God,
right?
Oh my God, yum. I'm like, okay, I get it.
You're like, I'm here, hi.
They're hot, fine, fair enough. Miles Teller's doing his little ab dance on the beach. Good for him. I'm happy for him. If
with
he ever
70s porn mustache, which people are trying to grow back out. I'm like, no.
It's making a comeback, and I'm not going to be a part of that wave, but
nope.
people are hype on it. I mean,
I can't. That and the mullet, like I'm gonna let other people rock that one. I'm gonna step out. I'm gonna tap out of that.
I'm gonna tap out, but y'all run with it. And then so she turns to me during the movie and she's like, God, Tom Cruise, God, so hot. How old is he? I'm like, I think he might be 60 now.
Yeah, he's like in his 60s, yeah.
And again, for anybody listening, everybody is wonderful, and everyone different shapes and sizes, but I was like, he's 5'5". Like just stop. Just to piggyback off what you were saying. Nothing wrong with being 5'5" either. Everybody is different heights. I just want to clarify on that. But she specifically told me she wanted to marry someone over 6 foot. So I just had to let her know that he didn't meet the criteria.
Yeah, you're safe. You're safe for another wedding anniversary.
Until she stumbles up to LA. We'll see what happens. Hopefully she doesn't cross paths with Miles Teller. So Miles, if you're listening to this right now, stay away from my woman, man.
Okay, please, right? You're right. I think he has a woman, so that's a good thing.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Yeah. I think he's married. So kind of gives you some safety there.
It gives me a little cushion, at least for the time being.
Yeah. And like I said, my brain was never like mean, but what it was good was it was like I recognized that these were just good looking people that had flaws too, and it kind of normalized it for me. So that was one of the benefits of working in that field. It's like I started seeing people up close versus like the photoshopped image of them, and it made them seem more real. And because I was so isolated for so long, those were my people. I mean, I was comparing myself to these celebrities because I wasn't around real people to compare myself to. So after that second round of treatment, I got to a good place. I was able to get off medication. And, the difficulty with BDD is it's something that's going to be with you with life because you age. And inevitably things are going to change when you age. There's going to be certain facial things you don't like. There's certain, but what I recognize is my whole life, I was always chasing something. It was my hair when I was a kid, then it was my under eyes, then it was my skin, then it was, nose, then it was jaw, then it was it's like, it's never going to end.
Did it ever, not sorry to cut you off, but this has been in my head the entire time and I'm blurting it out, the question.
Yeah. Did
it ever make it below the face? Like, did it ever make it down to the body? Or is that something different? Is body dysmorphic disorder different from, because you brought this up at the beginning, body dysmorphia? Are they two different things?
Yeah, they are. I will say people can have BDD about their neck down. So for me, the one place that my BDD really hit me was the wideness of my body, because I thought I was like super wide, and I ran gyms. Like I used to run gyms for a gym that you shouldn't go to, but I'm not going to say it because I want to get you in trouble. But but I ran gyms for a company, like a major company, and I was in at the time the good shape, not even the best shape of my life, but really good shape. My friends were personal trainers and were bodybuilders, and I was in excellent shape. And I wanted my shoulders to get broader from working out, but I wanted my waist to go in. I'm just not born like that. I'm half Scandinavian, we're solid. And I was so fixated on that. So it was never about fat or weight or body percentage, which is more like what people call body dysmorphia, or it could be an eating disorder. It was more of the shape of my body. So people can have it from the neck down. They can have it where they don't think their calves are big enough, or, they feel like their body isn't even and it's not symmetrical. So people can definitely have it with the body as well. And I would say my hips and my width was probably the thing for me. And I remember pushing on my body to see how much thinner can my waist get, and I was hitting bone, and I was really thin at the time, and I was hitting bone, and I started looking up is there a surgery where they can break your bones and thin you out and heal, and then there was corsets, but I didn't want to look like a woman, so I was that's not gonna. So that was definitely a part of my journey as well. It's always majority bothered me more the neck up, because I think you can camouflage with clothes, and you can't really camouflage your face. So
I appreciate you answering that, because that was just, it was in my head so much. I'm does it ever get below the kind of the neckline?
For sure. People have had it where their torsos aren't long enough, or they don't feel like their chest is symmetrical, or they feel they have a scar on their body somewhere that they don't really like. So it's more of that versus I think my hips are too wide because my BMI is too high or something.
So can I ask you another question on top of that?
Of course.
For your skin care routine and then working out, for example, did you have to work out perfectly? Did you have to do every rep just right? Maybe a little bit of that OCD in there, but largely it was BDD kind of driving the wheel there. When you were doing your skincare routine, did it have to be the perfect products and applied at just the right time? And was there some of that to it, or could you?
Yeah, that's how my OCD kind of would jump in. I would say with the working out, there wasn't that. I have had clients where it's the perfect amount of reps and things like that. It definitely wasn't like that for me. Where it did come in is kind of a newer term, what they're calling orthorexia. It's where you are obsessed with clean eating. And so, growing up, my mom was not growing up, she still is, but my mom's a registered dietitian. Eating healthy in our household was always a thing. I worked at a gym. I knew about health food. We had a health food store next door where we would all eat. So for me, I became extremely fixated on clean eating. I had to have lettuce that was dark greens. I'd have dark chocolate instead of milk. All my dairy products had to be low fat. All of my breads had to be whole grains. I had to count macros and stuff. So I was trying to control my body with the eating like that. But it wasn't necessarily an eating disorder, because I wasn't restricting. It was I had to eat certain kind of foods, but the actual working out itself wasn't just right. But my skin stuff for sure. My skin, it was I wanted to do the morning routine as early as I woke up, and I would wait till right before bed to do the night one, so I'd have the most time with it. And I was always going, found a dermatologist I trusted. What products do I use? And it's I had to use that product because she okayed it, and I couldn't use a different one, and wanted to make sure that I applied it correctly. So that's where the obsessional component came in, but it was all because of the looks. It wasn't if I don't do it right, my cousin will die, or if I don't do it right, I'll get anxious. It was more so, if I don't do it right, then your skin's not going to look as good as it can, or,
Right.
researching hair stuff so that my hair won't fall out and I have to put it in properly. So it's all that kind of like perfectionism for the sole purpose of my appearance to look the best that it potentially could look.
Okay. That's a helpful distinction for me.
Yeah.
Two other things.
Yeah,
You mentioned medication. Is that an SSRI, or is it a different type of medication that you take for BDD?
Yeah, so it was definitely an SSRI. So I went on Prozac. I got up to 80 milligrams and I stayed on that. They did supplement it with Wellbutrin when I was feeling like really depression, like heavy depression.
Yeah.
But that was the medication I was on. And then I went off of it once I was coming to my psychiatrist for like a year or two, when I really kind of completed treatment, and I didn't really have anything to talk about. I was just kind of like, yeah, da da da. And so we decided to taper off. So we went down slowly. I think it took like a good 6 months to taper off completely. We went very slow to make sure new thoughts and feelings didn't come up. And they didn't, and I've been off medication ever since. And I think it was because I really did the work. I mean,
Yeah.
I know for the rest of my life, my appearance is going to change, and my brain's not going to like that. The difference is I don't do anything about it. I think when you have BDD, you can absolutely still work out and have a skincare routine and take care of yourself. You just got to make sure it's in the realm of normalcy. I'm not researching stuff all the time. I've always made a commitment to myself. I'm never going to get plastic surgery. It'll never go well. I don't care if big old lips become a big thing for guys. I think they already are. I'm not getting that. Like, I'm not doing that stuff because it will be ugly for me, and even if it isn't, part of my commitment to myself was to never do stuff like that, because I don't want my focus in life to be my appearance. I did that for so many years. It's exhaustive and it didn't end well for me. So, I think aging and BDD is just a normal part of it, and things are going to change, but I've accepted that, and I'm okay with that, so you get to a point where it's finally like, I don't need to put any effort into this. I'm at peace with it all.
Yeah.
And I think that's how come I've stayed in a really good place with it, because I just don't even entertain any of the old stuff that I did. Doesn't mean I don't care about my appearance. I probably always will care a little bit more than the average person, but the whole like seeing myself different thing, I don't think that's accurate anymore, because I can look back at old pictures of myself and be like, my skin was fine, my hair was fine, my nose isn't big, and it's almost like seeing the picture for the first time, because I would look at pictures forever and hate it, and now with a clear mind can look at that picture and completely see myself how I really looked.
That's awesome. That makes me really happy, man. Your story is really, really touching. Really, I mean, I could picture the isolation so much, and just being at that darkest moment. It really hit me. I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
It's scary as hell. And to see where you're at and just hear you talking about it now just makes me really happy. So I'm just glad that you're out here doing the work for others now too. One other thing I had, the golden standard, like with OCD, it's ERP. ERP. Is there a name for the talk therapy for BDD, or is it just these little exercises that you were doing to sort of like unpack, like basically point out these cognitive distortions or errors in thinking, as they would say, and sort of push back against them, which is like the opposite of what you want to do with OCD to a certain extent.
Yeah, so I would say like the start, just like OCD, you're going to definitely have the education component, because you really have to get that buy-in that you see something different. I mean, I don't think I would have moved forward with any treatment if I really kept believing what I saw in the mirror, because the only treatment I wanted was surgery or to be fixed, right?
Yeah.
So I had to get enough education from my provider to teach me. Ari had to teach me what was going on. And even though I wasn't ready to like jump ship, I always think about it as like, and I'm sorry if you're one of those people, but when you meet somebody that's like a flat earther, right? Like, you know,
I'm not.
Okay, good. You know, because we would have
I
to
do
end it.
believe that that the Earth is a sphere, and that
Well, I was going to
we're
say you have a globe in the back, so hopefully I figured I could use this analogy and we'd be good, we'd be safe. But it's like, my thing is like, once you get evidence the world is round, like you can choose to completely ignore it, or you can finally say like, yo, I've gotten evidence and I have to kind of walk away from what I once thought. So that's really what the education did for me. Besides educating me that the world was round, my therapist also educated me like, hey, this is what happens when you look in the mirror. And I got anorexia. Like, it made sense to me with the analogy, because I you know, I didn't personally have somebody in my life like that, but I you know, you've seen people in videos and
I've
stuff.
seen it. I've seen it at the gym that I go to now.
Oh,
And it breaks my heart because I don't know this individual at all, but I know that there needs to be just somewhat of a conversation around going to seek the professional help to get on that path, because she's absolutely rail thin. And so it's, just to your point.
Yeah. And so that kind of helped me. So that's kind of the first stage of treatment. The next stage is cognitive behavioral therapy. We don't see that as much in OCD, but with BDD, it is cognitive behavioral therapy. And what you're really doing in that process is it's like, how did I come to the conclusion that I was hideous? How did I come to the conclusion that I had horrible skin? And when I really had to work that process through with my therapist, it's like, wait a second, I don't really have any evidence that my skin's terrible. I don't have evidence that I'm unlovable and nobody ever wants to date me. In fact, I have evidence that people did. I was the reason we didn't date, is I'd push them away because I didn't think that I was worthy enough to date anyone. So it had me start challenging the beliefs that I had in my head. And that's what's a little different than OCD, is because with OCD, you know, the thought isn't true. So arguing with it doesn't make sense. I didn't know that these thoughts weren't true. That was sort of the process through cognitive behavioral therapy, starting to recognize that these thoughts were fallacies. Another thing that I did is kind of perception retraining. It's perceptual retraining. It's when I would look in the mirror or I'd look at photos of myself, which everybody has to do, we started to look at them differently. So instead of me like, you know, kind of swiping my phone to see the picture blown up, it's like, look at it from a normal distance, make eye contact with yourself. What do you objectively see versus like subjective attacks? What's going on in the picture? Let's see the whole thing. What's the vibe of the picture? Like, let's get out of like zooming in on a certain body part. Let's see yourself as a whole. And when I would start to look in the mirror like that, and that pictures where I'd see my whole self, I didn't look disfigured as much, because when I would look in a mirror traditionally with BDD, I'd zoom in on body parts and stare at them individually. But seeing my whole self, like when I'm talking to you right now, I'm looking kind of at this triangle, like your eyes in the top of your nose. And when
behind my mic,
right, and then I can't, right. But when I look, it was like, oh, okay, maybe I don't love what I see, but I don't look as disfigured. And then there is some exposure response prevention, but I would say it's done softer. It wasn't like I would go in there and like wear a prosthetic nose and walk around and call myself ugly, because I already thought I was ugly. So it wouldn't have been treatment to call myself ugly. I didn't need to pay somebody to tell me I was ugly. I got that, you know, and I was charging my own self.
Exactly.
I was already charging my own self, you know, whatever the cost was back then, an hour to call myself ugly. I didn't need somebody to give me permission to do so. So it was much more of like getting back into what I wanted it to look like. So I knew I wanted to be able to go to the beach during the day. So my exposure was being able to go to the beach. Now my response prevention was making sure when I got there, I didn't wear like a hoodie and cover up my face, which I used to do, or I didn't wear baggy clothes to feel more like less, you know, like to kind of like blend, you know, not blend in, or it wasn't, you know, it was going and getting food and making eye contact. So treatment felt more like getting into real life than like doing something that was disturbing.
And that's a great example that you use too, because as you were talking about the Westwood situation, I was like, okay, I see the components of CBT, looking for the facts, looking for what supports it, what doesn't. But then I also, when you were talking about like being around celebrities and getting out in front of people and sort of forcing yourself into these situations that you would have otherwise maybe retreated away from, that is an exposure in its own way. So I see what you mean with sort of it's a soft exposure versus the kind of the other example that you use, because and even like getting around some of these celebrities, that is an exposure because you had been looking at them in these magazines and now you get to look at them up close and you're like, oh, this pedestal that I had them on all this time, it's like, no, they have blemishes too. Like, they're not these perfect people that oftentimes it's normal, right? Like we all do that. I mean, I do that too. Like the other day I saw Cooper Cup at a restaurant down on the peninsula and I had a little man crush moment. I'll be honest. I kind of lost my shit there for a second. So we all do it.
Yeah.
But I like the examples that you're using because I think that people can relate to that.
Yeah, and that's how I felt. I mean, I never felt like I was being put in situations that were definitely discomforting and I had to stretch my comfort level for sure. But I always knew that there was value in them. I was like, this is the life I want. I want to go back and date. And I would say like the closing stages of my treatment was really starting to find value in myself that had nothing to do with appearance.
Yeah.
And it started to have myself kind of reconnect with things that matter. So I got back into martial arts. I got back into tennis. I started learning Spanish. I volunteered at an animal shelter. I got the job at the gyms. I started making friends. I went back to school. I started dating. Like all those things kind of came into play and starting to build up my self-esteem and other things outside of my appearance. And that was really kind of like the final stages of treatment is going and living my life and proving that I don't need to have the perfect skin to go get a job. I don't need to have the perfect hairline to go back to class. Like all these rules that BDD was like, fix this and then you can do that, never came into play. And so when I left treatment, I felt more like a whole person. I felt like, okay, there's other things that matter. It's not my appearance first and everything are these small, like insignificant things on the bottom. It was like, no, my appearance and all these other things mattered. And so obviously as a therapist now, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I work on with my clients. It's like, I'm trying to get them to see that when we have BDD, we've made the appearance our whole world. Nothing else matters. It just doesn't, I don't care about grades. I don't care about seeing family members. Like I need to fix this appearance thing so I can finally live life. And it's like, no, go live life without it being fixed and let's see what happens. And so when my life was great and I was dating and friends and school and work and all these different things, it's like, wow, I really didn't need to be like fixed and perfect before doing these things. I'm just fine. And it's hard. I mean, we live in a society where it's like people are getting plastic surgery all the time. And I'm not judgmental of that. I think it comes back down to somebody with BDD shouldn't entertain that. We don't, just like an alcoholic can't have a couple drinks. We can't have a couple surgeries. But some people with BDD do. I always hope if I work with a client that's dead adamant on getting plastic surgery, I'm like, at least work with me first. So you're going to be in a clear mindset. So if you do choose, because I can't follow them and prevent it from happening, but I at least can get them into a better mental state so that if they do decide to get it, it's not going to be a horrid outcome. Because a lot of clients or a lot of people in the BDD community that get plastic surgery and no mental health care first hate the plastic surgery. They sue the surgeon. It's this big ordeal because they think they further messed up their face. And then they start looking at old pictures of themselves and being like, I wish I still look like that, even though when they took the picture, they hated their looks. Like it's a whole mess. So that's just been like my commitment is just not to do that. But yeah, I mean, I felt like leaving treatment, that was kind of like the whole thing. So it's a little bit different with OCD. But the reason it's considered an OCD related disorder is because you do have those kind of like the doubt, the uncertainty, the thoughts, shame, the feelings, the shame, and you do behaviors that are very compulsive in order to make yourself feel good enough to function. So very similar in kind of theory, different in treatment.
Well, it's interesting too because I'm like, where you are living in the mecca of plastic surgery. So
I think Orange County is probably even worse than LA. I heard so.
It is. So this is almost like an exposure in and of itself, just every day. But you're living that values-based life, which I talk about all the time on this show, and plugging into that, which I'm sure that you talk about with your clients.
Of course. Yeah.
That, okay, sure, your looks can be important, but there are so many more parts and pieces to who you are as a human being, and trying to be anchored in that and start to emphasize those more as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I love values work, is because for me, it sounds weird, but like living in Orange County, right, and there's all this plastic surgery, for me, it's almost like I would have to choose to like enter that world to care. Like I'd have to get involved in that and stuff. And then I just choose not to. I don't judge those that do, but it's like, I'm not going to play that game. Like that's just not for me. I'm not even going to go down that path. If somebody finds value in it for themselves, especially if they don't have BDD, awesome, right? Like that's your choice. But for me personally, it's just not something that I value. You know, I just don't. I think that I have a lot more to offer. And I don't think that if I got, I don't even know what I would need, but if I went in and they said, do this, right? Like I've learned through the treatment that my life wouldn't suddenly become amazing. And that's what happens for a lot of people that get plastic surgery with BDD. They fall into a depression because they get the plastic surgery thinking their life's going to be sunshine, unicorn farts and rainbows. And they're like, yes, let's go. And it's like, but the disorder was never treated. So they just feel miserable still.
Yeah.
You know, and I always tell my clients, like, you're not going to get a front of the line pass because something changes. And I get it, because people will say, oh, well, there's studies that show more attractive people get more jobs and get paid better and stuff. And it's like, okay, you know, fine. I totally get that. I totally understand that. But the change that you want is to go from somebody who's right now currently like ashamed of their existence to somebody who's like welcomed and attractive and people accept, not just like a little nip and tuck to feel a little bit more attractive. And so what you're hoping the surgery is going to do, it'll never fill that hole. And you'll keep chasing it until it just downright becomes a disaster. So
yeah, it's a bottomless pit. There's no end to that journey if you go down that path. You can't satiate yourself. It's like this thirst that you just can't quench because of the disorder. So don't even start, because it's fruitless.
And that's how I got better too, is not even starting it. It's like, I'm not even going to go to the mirror right now, because I would go to a party, look in the mirror, it'd be bad lighting, didn't like how I looked, my whole mood would change, I'd become depressed, want to go home. Like it was never a cycle that worked. It was never like days I would look in. And if I did ever look in the mirror and like how I looked because of treatment, it was like, yeah, but then it was like slots. It's like I felt good for that minute and then it changed. And the good thing is, like, now I don't have to do the same things I did in treatment. Like I'm not, doing any of that stuff. Like now I just live my life. Like I get up, I look in a mirror to get ready, I move on, but I'm not constantly looking in the mirror. I'm not constantly doing that. So the good thing is the treatment becomes a lifestyle. You just kind of live it, and you get to that point where it's like, okay, I live a way in which I don't make my appearance like the central focus. Is it something I care about? Sure. I'm single, so we try to look semi-decent, but
yeah, of course.
But it's one of many other things that matter. So I care a lot more about like helping clients. I care more about a lot of different things in my life than my appearance. So that's where you've got to get, I think, when your whole focus is no longer on your image and your appearance. And that's when the BDD is kind of lost. It's just not valued anymore. So
yeah. And so it loses its weight, which is kind of one of the things I talk about with OCD, is like the thoughts. How much does a thought weigh? As much weight as you give it, right? It's kind of like the punchline, but it's like, it's exactly what you're talking about. And there's something, and I'm looking at the time here, so I want to be respectful, but there's something very interesting about going through the treatment and then turning things outward. So like BDD, OCD, so many different brain health challenges. There is a treatment component. Okay, I need to learn how to work with these thoughts, overcome whatever the challenges that I'm going through, and I need to be taught some sort of, through the various treatment modalities. Maybe there's medication in there, but then I'm obviously a big advocate for some sort of talk therapy. Let's work on the cognition side of the house. But once you do that, there is something about being able to then turn, when you have that strength back. So I always want to advocate for, take care of yourself first. But once you have that strength back, being able to turn it out to others, the amount of value and satisfaction and just feelings of fulfillment in my life, it's so profound. Because I'll use the money example, working for corporate America. It was like I was just trying to gobble up promotion after promotion, more money. And it's just like you talking about the plastic surgeries. It's like, it is an appetite. You just can't satiate it. It doesn't matter how much you consume. You just want more. But once you turn it outwards and really start to think about how can I help other people, you talked about your clients. That's what kind of set me off. It's like that becomes somewhat addicting, but in like a healthy way.
For sure. I mean, that's how I met Liz McInville. I mean, we're both she's a national, I'm a lead advocate for the International OCD Foundation. And we all kind of have our own kind of things that we're really wanting to expand on. Mine, obviously, being body dysmorphic disorder. Yeah. And advocacy is such a huge part. For me, walking away from it and doing nothing, it was really hard. I think at first it was like a honeymoon. So I was like, yay, life is great. I get to finally live my life. But after a while, I actually, it's crazy. My advocacy came when the Montel Williams show was doing a special on body dysmorphic disorder. My psychiatrist had got in contact to be on the show, and he couldn't make it. So it was a different therapist was going to be on it, but they wanted a client, and I had just finished treatment. I was doing pretty well. And he's like, would you want to go out to New York and be on the show? And I was naive to Hollywood at the time. And I'm like, sure. Yeah, no. Probably in like 3 months. He's like, okay, you'll leave in 2 days. So I didn't really have time to like make the decision, which probably helped. But I went out to New York, went on that show twice to talk about BDD. And I got hit from so many people around the world hitting me up on social media like, oh my God, I didn't know this is what I had. So for me to just abandon that just felt cruel, because when I was in treatment, when I went to that support group, there was, I won't say her name, but there was a person in that support group who was on the way out of her treatment. And I remember when she talked about it, I'm like thinking, okay, she has nothing that I don't have, and she got better, and she's going to go live her best life. And so even just meeting her for a little bit of time and knowing that she could go and like get better and like live her life to the fullest motivated me to push through. So it was the same thing. I was like, if I can be that for others, and since it's something that's rarely talked about, I'll do it. So I think advocacy and giving back is such a huge part of the recovery process. And I always tell people, you don't have to do what I do. You don't have to, speak about it publicly, but anything that you can do to help with. Sometimes it's just talking to a family member or a friend about what you're going through to help that kind of education, anything you can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because even if you just help one person, it's that ripple effect, because maybe they're the one that then goes on to be the next Chris and share their story that then impacts thousands of people, millions of people, so definitely. Two questions to kind of wrap things up. First one being, where can people find you? They're going to resonate with this story. How can they find you? How can they work with you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say like social media is a good place to find me. So my social media is just my name. So at christrondsen. I'll give my like generic email. My personal email is just my name at gmail.com. So christrondsen at gmail.com. I have a work email, but I also get a bunch of work stuff. So I would probably miss an email that way. But yeah, I mean, social media, find me on Instagram, just DM me. My email, christrondsen at gmail.com. But I work at the Gateway Institute. We're in Costa Mesa, California. So we have intensive outpatient programs, weekly support groups, and individual clients. So we do a free assessment so people can come. Sometimes people think they have BDD or OCD and might have something else that we treat, or it might be something we don't treat. So that's why we do the free assessment, just to make sure that people don't start treatment if that's not what they need, get them the right care, but they can do a free assessment and then request to work with me. We have multiple therapists. So yeah, I mean, I see clients Monday through Friday and Saturday morning. So I'm always kind of working. So definitely hit me up though. I mean, even if it's not to work with me, even if it's just to be like, yo, heard your story on Zach's podcast and like totally relate. I love those I get those all the time. And so I always want, to give as much of myself as people need. So please hit me up. Here to talk to people and stuff to give back for sure. I was going to make a joke. I was going to say something, but I was like, I don't want people to know my humor. I was going to be like, hit me up and I love a good cheesecake. So, if you send me a carrot cake or a cheesecake, you'll get higher on my response back. But then I'm like, great. Now somebody's going to be like, I was going to hit him up, but I don't know how to cook a cheesecake. So I'm not going to make that joke, but
or you're going to end up with like 25 cheesecakes just stacked up on your front door.
Oh, for sure. But then somebody's going to put raspberry sauce on it, which destroys cheesecakes. And I hate the fruit sauce. And then they would have made that cheesecake for no reason. So don't want them to spend all the time cooking and it's bad. So,
well, now they know. See, you did that on purpose so that they can send you
just
exactly
a plain
what you want.
Cheesecake and we're good.
and we're chilling.
Good.
We're chilling. So to close things out, what is one piece of advice that you would give someone listening right now who is at the start of their mental health journey?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the very, very first thing that I always say is get help, get help, get help. This is not something you're going to fight and beat on your own. And I'm not saying that because I think you're weak, because I wouldn't have fought it on my own. It is too complex and it's too difficult to tackle on your own. Now, I get that care is hard to find at times. So the good alternative would be to access like a really good workbook on BDD. There's a really good one by Scott Granick has written one. There are good ones by Catherine Phillips, Sabine Wilhelm, Fuga Nazaralu. So there's a lot of really good workbooks if you can't find someone that specializes in it, but find help, support group, online support group, something. You gotta find help. Let's say you're already there, you're already in help. I would say the one thing that I wish I would have learned quicker is believe the therapist when they tell you see something different, because now on the other side they were right the whole time. Sucks to admit, you never like to be wrong. But
Yes.
I would say that was the biggest thing. If somebody could have just told me sooner, like, I know it's going to sound crazy, but what you see in the mirror is not how you actually look, I think would be the biggest thing. But the final thing for me is just, when I think of like, what is the purpose of life? I mean, everybody has their own answer to that question, but I think we all were put on this planet with some gift. We all have some unique set of gifts that kind of come together, and really discovering what that is and doing it full throttle, whether it's, a chef, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a therapist, an advocate, podcast, right? Like anything that you're set to do, like do it and do it well, and you'll feel fulfilled. And so when it comes to BDD, we don't do that, right? Like our whole focus in life is to look better, to look good, to look great. And I promise you that that's not the key to life. I thought it was for so long. I thought if I could just get clear skin and these things fixed, I'd be good and set, and it never happened, and it never will. So in our treatment, in our kind of world of mental health and BDD, it's like finding what matters to you, and it has nothing to do with your appearance. So once I found my footing and found my calling, sure, appearance matters, but it's not what matters. Living that value-based life that you're talking about does. So
I resonate with that so much. I've seen that in my own life. It's facts. It's just the truth. When you obviously have to take care of what it is that you're going through, but once you do that purpose, the gifts, everybody was given some unique gift. I see that so much in my own life, and then the people around me. I see it with you. By the way, you're great at doing this, so it's no surprise that you're kind of marrying all these different skills to do the therapy, and then would you call it broadcasting, or
entertainment journalism is usually what they call it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Entertainment journalism. Yes. Okay. Because it's just no surprise to me. You were made for this. So,
thanks, man.
So yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Chris. Thank you for sharing your story. You're a wealth of knowledge. People are really going to benefit from this, and definitely going to have to bring you on for episodes in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, keep doing what you're doing. Awesome for writing a book. I think that's huge to give back. Congrats on the podcast and stuff. Now that I know that you're a neighbor practically, we got to meet up for sure. But it was nice meeting you. Thank you for what you do. I mean, just like, you gave me props, I have to give you props. Like as somebody yourself who has gone through this, obviously, Liz gave me some background. So I knew, I was not walking in and getting ambushed by some weirdo, right? But, she gave me background on your story. So I just think it's one of those things that I always have the utmost admiration for people that decided to take their kind of pain into purpose and say, look, like what I went through is not what defines me, but it's given me a voice and something that I can do to give back to the community. So thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me on, and I really appreciate it. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you.
Of course. Thanks, man.